ins okay, the final installment of lesson 5 still has to do with our rational exponents. So what we're looking at now is looking at opposite operations. Now we already talked about the opposite of squaring something. The opposite of squaring something is square rooting. Okay, we've done that before since grade 9. Now what happens, however, if we have the opposite of a third root? Well, remember of squaring something, square rooting, this was 1/2 and this was to a 2. So the opposite of a third root makes sense then that that would be, would be cubing. So the opposite of cubing is third rooting. The opposite of third rooting is cubing something. Now the same will apply if I have something that we don't necessarily talk about cubing. What if I have the opposite of a fifth root? Well, the fifth root would mean that I would want to take my item and I would want to take it to the power of 5. So the opposite of having something to the power of 5 would be taking the fifth root of it. So let's see what kind of examples we're talking about. Okay, so we're saying here I want to solve for my x. If I look at my x, it's to the 1/2, okay, which is square rooting it. So the opposite of square rooting something is squaring it. So what we would do is we would square both sides, because whatever you do to one side, you have to do to the other side. And when I do that, the 1/2 and the 2 are going to cancel out because they're opposite operations. And I end up with 25 squared, which is 625. Okay, and we could check to see if we were correct. We could take 625, substitute it in for our x. So if I change colors here, if I went 625 to the power of 1/2, or the square root of 625, I know that equals 25. So in fact, my x does equal 625. Now let's go over to the next question. If I have 1/3, x to the 1/3 equals 4, then in order to get rid of that third root, I would have to cube both sides. Now when I cube both sides, the 1/3 and the 1/3 and the 3 are going to cancel out because they're opposite operations, and I end up with x equals 4 cubed, which is 4 times 4, 16, times another 4, we're looking at 64. So if I took the cubed root of 64, I would get the number 4. Okay, now let's go down and take a look at some more examples like this. And in fact, I think I'll just X that. So the same principle applies here. So if I want to get x by itself, I have to multiply both sides by, actually take the power of 6 on both sides. So the 6th root, and if I take it to the power of 6, cancels them out because they're opposite operations, and we end up with 3 to the power of 6, which is 729. Okay, and finally, the last example is x to the 1/5. When I take x to the 1/5, if I take it to the 5th root, both sides, the 1/5 and the 5 are going to cancel out because they're opposite operations, as well as power to a power. 1/5 times 5 equals 1. And 2 to the 5th is 32. All right, so that's the last installment of lesson number 5. You'll be all ready for some work now.